I think one of the aspects of the Asco imagery that's presented in museum exhibitions, for instance, it's somewhat decontextualized, of course. In the early 1970s, I've often stated that East Los Angeles functioned like a separate country within the city. Being such an isolated environment, primarily of Mexican-American at that time, Chicano population, surrounded by freeways actually, bordered by freeways, there was a very distinct difference in the way people operated, in that the relationship between the rest of the city was that one really couldn't enter into the other parts of the city without being harmed in some manner, either psychologically or physically. But also the infrastructure of Hollywood was very evident here in Los Angeles, where one could, from any rooftop, see the Hollywood sign and have this image that, we're all going to be movie stars, but yet you turn on your TV and you'd never see a Chicano, and if you did, it was a very negative experience. And so this idea of repression of your voice played a tremendous role in influencing. And so the idea was, how can someone create something that could be understood in your own voice while being simultaneously translated to the language of the others.
Act 1, Scene 1.
Okay, my name's William Franklin Herrón III. I'm of Scottish, Irish, Spanish, Mexican, and American Indian descent. Well, Asco for me didn't really start in terms of the name.
What I remember is that we hung a show and we looked around the room, the four of us, and we thought, oh my God, this work gives us Asco.
Means nausea. It means the desire to vomit, the desire to expel. Growing up in East Los Angeles during the 1950s and 1960s, there was a lot to be nauseated about.
The Vietnam War was going on, and civil rights was forging ahead in the 60s and into the 70s. And so when we were beginning to call ourselves artists, Asco was kind of the appropriate name for the group.
Even the usage of the term Asco, of inverting it and make it into a positive term, was very much like the term of the term Chicano, for instance, that had been a very negative term that was sort of inverted and inserted back into society with positive attributes.
Actually, the word Chicano was a new term. And I think at the time we, embraced a new word, because I think one of the mottos of Asco was, if it's new, I like it.
The term Chicano denotes a progressive political movement that is primarily spearheaded by young Mexican Americans.
We had already done some performances on the streets, had taken some photographs, but it wasn't until 1973 when we had an exhibition at a local community gallery where the show itself was titled Asco.
My concept was an exhibition of our worst works, and I wanted to call it Asco, so I did a lot of throw-up paintings and stuff that was just paintings that were ripped apart.
And everyone thought that we were Asco, and everyone actually told us that we gave them Asco. And so, we were quite overcome by this sense and desire to vomit, that we took on the name and inverted it and turned it inside out in a retching form by which we were proudly emblazoned with the term Asco.
Basically, I met Gronk when I was about 17 years old. He was doing a performance at a park with my younger sister, and it was called Cockroaches Have No Friends.
Hi, my name is Gronk. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. The full name is Glugio Gronk Nicandro, but nobody could ever say that, so I've shortened it to just Gronk. For me, it was more in a casual way that we got together. You know, we crossed paths with one another because we kind of, within the community that we grew up, kind of stood out a little bit.
Gronk was a huge influence because my mom would be driving me around the neighborhood, and all of a sudden I'd see this guy sitting like on a curbside with like wearing a glitter top and these jeans. I'm thinking, who is that? Who is that? So eventually I got to meet him, but he was out sketching in this garb that he wore, long velvet coats that touched the floor with these big hairdos.
Act 1, Scene 3.
Well, I think we poked fun at everything. To us, everything was we would even do it like when we would get dressed up. We would really like try to dress as outrageous as we could, and we knew we were going to go to a party where everybody was going to be pretty straight and pretty standard looking.
The glitter of the era that allowed us to constantly take chances, and the idea of utilizing makeup, for instance, it was nothing to see Willie Herrón wearing makeup, wearing baby clothes, and Gronk wearing some kind of crazy costume, or Patssi wearing big enormous hats, and I used to walk around wearing, I would put paint and wear yellow eyebrows and just show up somewhere. And so transforming any event into a performance and to see how people would respond. And it wasn't always pleasant, and sometimes it made things more exciting.
I mean, it was very scary when sometimes we would show up. I remember one party I went to, and you know, I had pink corduroy cut off Daisy Dukes with red platforms, and my hair was red and my eyebrows were shaved, and I just had a little red t-shirt that said 21 on it. And of course the cholos called me out, and there I was in the middle of the street, and I was in my 10-speed. So there I was in the middle of the street fighting with cholos, and my one platform busted. So I had the platform flapping on the back, and it was still stuck to my foot. So I was like all like doing a lopsided Frankenstein. I don't know. It was like very interesting, and all these girls came out of the party and started hitting the guys and like trying to jump in for me. Those are the kinds of things, events that were social, that fueled artwork, that fueled our concepts, and fueled what it is that we felt that we really had to do, so people could be free and have the freedom of expression and be how they want without their lives being in danger. And we felt that we were always challenging that because we used our bodies to express ourselves.
And I actually was the ugly duckling when I was a child, and people in the family would feel sorry for me because I was so unattractive, overweight and unattractive. So I decided, oh really? Watch this. So I went to makeup school. I took theatrical makeup. I learned the tricks of the trade because in a lot of those photographs, I'm wearing pancake white makeup, or I'm really over exaggerating my look. And that's why I'm looking right into the lens of the camera, and what I'm doing is I'm looking at the world. I'm almost daring you. When I'm looking into that lens, I'm like, I dare you. So I learned how to alter my image and just act out my fantasy. But behind all of that, I was really tired of the negative stereotyping of Mexicans. We never looked glamorous in the paper and the media. What I remember thinking is, where am I in that picture? Where are my beautiful friends in that picture?
All my brothers and my cousins had served in the military. So upon my final year, right before I graduated, I was drafted. I believe Gronk was already in the military during that time. He was also drafted, and so I filed conscientious objector, and somehow or another, with the grace of God, was able to get out of it.
We were sort of the targeted and hunted group at that time, that even just being youthful males as a particular category were being utilized for an illegal war, the Vietnam War. And so many of the people that I knew and I was growing up with and my friends were all either fighting or already dead by the time we were creating Asco imagery. And so there was always this distrust of the rest of the society, because all of the kinds of offenses that a capitalist 20th century society could impact on a particular neighborhood was actually taking place in East Los Angeles. For instance, East Los Angeles had the highest dropout rate, the lowest educational achievement, had various exceedingly high rates of various diseases and social problems.
Chicanos are marching to protest the high casualty rate of our people in Vietnam. We have suffered 22% of all casualties in Vietnam, yet we only make up 5% of the total population here in the United States. The Chicano people, through our moratorium, are saying now that the front line for Chicano youth is not in Vietnam, but in the struggle for social justice here in the barrios of the United States.
My influence with the Chicano movement was rather direct. I was a student leader in the Chicano walkouts. I was trained by a number of people that had been labor leaders.
I think the marker was the moratorium in 1970, August 29th.
This is a moratorium. This is for La Raza. Yes, for us, and for the world to see. Because today is a day of history for all of La Raza, wherever they are. Throughout Latin America, throughout Mexico, wherever brown people exist, today is a day of history. And from this day on, La Raza Mexicana shall be history.
I really felt it was more of a police riot at the end than it evolved into a police riot right out of it being a peaceful demonstration. Right after the moratorium, I really felt that my art had a reason and it had a place in society.
Willie was considered the muralist. So everybody would go to him and say, could you do a mural? And he would say yes, and then come to me later on and ask, would you like to do a mural? Well, one of the first pieces is still in existence. It's called the black and white mural.
But wait a minute, they gave us all this paint, and we need paint, and we're not getting paid, and we need this money to buy paints to paint our paintings. So let's take all these paints home and let's just keep the black and white. Most of the time I would swing by and give them a call in the morning and just say, later this afternoon I'm gonna go work on the mural. You have time to come. He didn't know what I was gonna paint that day, and I never knew what he was gonna paint either.
The idea behind that piece was to leave a record of a particular moment of time in a neighborhood that experienced occupation by law enforcement. And so the imagery we used was taken from still photographs.
So I started with the monkey, and he started with the man. You know, then I did a soldier.
I have an image of a mime. And the mime is actually the mime from Children of Paradise, which is a French film that was made in the 40s during Nazi occupation. And so here is a reference point that a nod to those that have been occupied prior.
So we were like respecting each other, doing a frame each. And then one day he starts taking up 2 frames. And I just said, hey, wait a minute, I thought we were doing 1 each, right? So, all right, well, that's cool. So then later on, I got the second row and I did 7 frames in a row. And so I created the central scene, which was taken from photographs of the 1970s moratorium. And that, little by little, allowed the mural to evolve into being the moratorium, the black and white mural.
I think that the most important thing about Asco is to acknowledge that they were there very early on within the Chicano movement as a part of it. The fact that in some ways they had positions or approaches that deviated from a norm, to the extent that there was a norm, is part and parcel of any movement. And I think that it's only been in the last 10 years that people have begun to understand that they marked out one of several positions that were in play.
Asco consider themselves part of the Chicano movement, but I think that this notion of mutability in a way, and the way that they were so open to expressing themselves in a variety of ways, made it so that many Chicano artists criticized the type of work they did as falling outside of the boundaries of something that was politically relevant, something that was for the people.
During the start of Asco, everything we did was considered to be not Chicano art. We were not the Chicano artists that people were looking for. People were looking for artists that were creating pre-Columbian motifs. People were looking for things that were somewhat folkloric. People were not interested in artists that were responding to urban life, the kinds of concerns of the late 20th century, the kinds of things that related to sort of global culture.
I remember there was a time where on a couple of occasions we went to go see Jodorowsky movies, Fellini movies.
Japanese film, French New Wave, all of these different activities that were taking place around the world, because the fact was, although most people would say, oh, you grew up in poverty and you grew up in East Los Angeles, well, that didn't mean you lived in a vacuum somewhere that was not connected to the rest of the world.
I remember Twiggy and these fashion icons, and I remember looking at Vogue magazine and thinking, I want to look like that. So I put on all this heavy makeup, and go out in the world, and I didn't realize that those models didn't look like that every day, Patsy. That was just for the photo shoot or the runway.
For me, it was also that every member of the group brought something unique to the table, to the discussion of art making. With Patssi, it was an element of photography, kind of an almost operatic sensibility that she brought into my world. And with Harry, it was an exchange of ideas on an intellectual level where we would have conversations and sparks would fly and ideas would fly. And with Willie, the language of paint was an important element. And so each one, I think, brought a uniqueness to the group that kind of forged it ahead. And it wasn't kind of a typical collective in a sense. That was my tooth, it just fell.
It wasn't about hating. It wasn't about being jealous. It was about trust. And I think a lot of it, as we created, we became brothers and sisters.
People say, well, why were you out with all those guys, all those men? And those were just the others that were interested in the same thing that I was. And so it didn't matter if you were a woman or a man. I just found a quick bond with these other people that were thinking along the same lines as I was. And then we just had fun at the same time. I don't know if we even talk about the fun that we had. We're young, we're exploring, we're were creating different images and objects, and that was really the fun part for me. There were no limits.
I mean, we forget that they met each other when they were, 16, 17, 18 years old. So Asco, like they always say, was their informal art school. It was their training ground, and it was a space too for kind of a mutual recognition that I think is very powerful.
Act 1, Scene 4.
It's a story that's been written about many times, but the previous day I had gone to a museum with this girl, showing her all the work, and it dawned on me that after looking at all the work that there was no Chicano art. And of course, Los Angeles being the second largest Mexican city in North America, it seemed like it was not right that it should be that way. And again, being 21 at the time, I decided I would just start pounding on doors, and found a curator who told me that Chicanos don't make art, they're in gangs. And I decided to invite Willie and Gronk to come with me that evening, and we would show them what an art gang can do. And we spray painted our names on the wall, but on the lower right hand corner of the museum, transforming the museum itself into a work of art. Patssi couldn't attend that evening, but I came back early in the morning before 10 and photographed Patssi on the bridge. We went back specifically to go back and photograph her, and by 11 it had been whitewashed, it was gone.
I couldn't believe it when I heard that it was going to happen. I couldn't believe it. And the first thing that came to my mind was like, oh, we got in because our friends work there. Oh yeah, you let me in through the back door. I don't have to pay to go see that band because I'll open the back door and you can get in. I never really felt comfortable, and like I said, I kept reflecting on, well, why did I go over there and like tag it, and now I feel like a hypocrite. And now that it has a chance to travel among the few exhibitions of all the Pacific Standard Time exhibitions that were mounted, this one's among the few that continue to have a life. It just led me to believe that it went beyond our friends letting us in the back door. It was really the work in the end that gave it the life after. So now I see the exhibition completely different.
Maybe one had to take lessons from the publicity machine of Hollywood in how to convert images into fact, how to make a better story out of something that has no narrative whatsoever, and how to retell something that's never once been told. And so through Asco, I found that it was necessary to take a cue from the Pachuco era, in which the Pachucos had viewed themselves as being diamonds when they would present themselves. And of course, a deeper look into how diamonds are formed, and that is pressure, heat, something that we were experiencing, and this idea of sort of just the right amount of a mass and energy could create such a diamond that could have its brilliance presented and reflected throughout the world, is something that I believe Asco aspired to. And again, it's been referred to as diamonds in the rough. I don't really believe we ever started off as being rough. We were somewhat quite astute, even as children, in order to survive our own childhood on the streets of East LA.